We're talking Cincinnati Bengals football on the Ourlads Football Network. Also, the Ourlads Football YouTube Channel. I'm Greg DePalma. And if we're talking Cincinnati Bengals football, that means John Sheeran is with us from A to Z Sports.com. How's it going, John?
Doing well, Greg. We're in the final week of training camp and just ready for actual football to start.
Yeah, that's it. That first taste of training camp, that's what gets you excited. And then you watch a preseason game or so, and it's like, all right, enough of this nonsense. Let's get the season started. So that's where we're at now, and still a few weeks away. So just to recall this. So once the third preseason game is over, then that's when all the roster. How many days after that third preseason game does the roster have to be set?
Tuesday, August 27th at 4 p.m. Eastern is when every team has to get down to 53. And this could be a case where teams will cut guys like a day after the game, or they may wait until that Tuesday. I know typically what the Bengals do is that they'll just wait until 4 p.m. on Tuesday to just have like 30 whatever cuts or something like that. So it just all comes out at once. But yeah, next Tuesday will be the day.
Yeah, that's going to be a wild day. And you're going to see how the Bengals and every other team, of course, how they handle the back of their depth chart. How is there a pattern you've noticed at all with the Bengals regarding that back of the depth chart, whether or not, hey, whoever that 52 is usually is?
Not necessarily. I think with this year, we have a good sense about what positions they may go deep at. And we can get into that a little bit here on the program. But I think there might just be like a handful of spots that are truly up for grabs. And that, I think, has been known for a while. Injuries have kind of thrown the whole process in a loop, particularly at the defensive line, where they've had a lot of, late additions in training camp and guys just, playing out of necessity who just got here a couple weeks ago. But we can talk about like tight end, wide receiver, cornerback / safety. Like some of those positions may end up carrying like one or two more guys just because that's where the talent is. And it's just going to be really tough to cut some of these guys who are really just grinding out and need a good final preseason game to really state their case.
How are injuries treating the team this offseason? So far, so good?
So they've had 3 guys that have gone on to IR, and coincidentally, all of them are from the 2021 draft class. So they were in the last year of the rookie contracts. You have Cam Sample, the backup defensive end, Chris Evans, the backup running back / kickoff returner, Deontay Smith, who's been basically a healthy scratch at offensive tackle. So all 3 of those guys are going to miss the season. Other than that, everyone should be okay for the start of the regular season. I know Jake Browning's dealing with a rib injury, and he could play through it, but he's not going to because, again, he's going to make the team. It's the preseason. Marius Mims has like what they call a strained pectoral muscle, so he'll be out probably until right before week 1. We expect him to start practicing then. Sheldon Rankins has kind of been nursing an injury of his own, so he hasn't really played in the preseason. McKinley Jackson, the team's 3rd-round pick at defensive tackle, he suffered like what looked like a scary knee injury, I believe like a couple weeks ago now, but he's still week to week, so he'll probably be okay for the start of the season. And Brad Robbins, the guy they drafted, the punter they drafted last year, he's got like a hip flexor he suffered last week, so he may or may not punt this week. But regardless, I mean, he's battling a rookie undrafted guy in Ryan Rico at punter. So if he doesn't return, he may be cut or just placed on IR.
Yeah, isn't Rico? He was in the guide, I think, the Ourlads guide. I know they don't put many punters or kickers in there, but I could have sworn he was in the guide. I have to check up that. All right. Tell you what, let's go ahead and let's go down the depth chart here. The Ourlads Cincinnati Bengals depth chart. So with Mims, I noticed that Tucker, our depth chart guru, has Mims starting right now over Brown. Is that the case? Is he already starting, or will Trent Brown start the season number 1?
There was definitely a case for Mims to start just because he was taking the reps with the ones throughout May and June. I believe Trent Brown missed OTAs with like a personal thing, and then he came back in mandatory minicamp, but Mims had already been taking the reps with the ones, so that's where they still had him. And then Trent Brown started training camp on the non-football injury list with like some back tightness. So Mims was still practicing with the ones for the first couple of weeks, and then he suffered his injury, I believe, right before the first preseason game. He exited the game, wanted to get it checked out. They found it was a strained pec. So Trent Brown is now practicing with the ones again now that he's healthy. So as it stands right now, Trent Brown is the presumed starter until Mims returns. But if Mims does return with enough time leading up to week 1, I honestly can't tell you who's going to be that starter just because Mims had been taking all those reps throughout the offseason and he looked really good for just being a rookie. But obviously, Trent Brown is an established veteran and they would have some trust about him just, showing up for the regular season and just being the player that he's always been. So I think it's truly like a 50-50 situation. But if you were to ask me like 10 days ago, it probably would have been Mims.
All right. Well, that'll be interesting. We'll keep an eye on that. Either way, like you said, the Bengals have a good insurance policy. So that is definitely, I know that's something that the Packers don't have. I was just talking to our Packer insider, and he said they don't have a swing tackle. So that's not good news there. Okay. How about the rest of the offensive line? We know how big of a position this has been for this franchise, especially when Joe Burrow's been there. It's like the big story. And we just talked about those two tackles, so that's good. Orlando Brown, of course, on the other side, Orlando Brown Jr. As far as what you've seen to practice in preseason, and they were the line was very healthy last year. Does it look like there's a chance to even, pick up on that from last year to keep the chemistry going, and they should be an improved unit?
Yeah, I would say the 4 starters who are coming back from last year, they're about the same players that they were, so the same effectiveness can be expected. Along with, I think, with the playbook kind of changing a little bit and be more offensive line friendly, if you will, with more play action, more under center runs. Like maybe they could be even better. And just looking at this depth chart, this is how it probably was at the beginning of the preseason when you had Jackson Carman, Jackson Kirkland, Trey Hill as your backup left tackle, left guard, center. Since then, Carman has been abysmal in the preseason, to put it pretty blatantly. So he's been pretty much demoted to the bottom of the entire offensive line depth chart. And they've had Jackson Kirkland actually playing both left guard and left tackle. He played left tackle in the latest preseason game, and he looked okay for being like a second year guy who didn't really play as a rookie. He was injured all last year. And then Matt Lee, the guy that drafted the 7th round, he looked really good in the preseason opener, playing behind Trey Hill. And then he ended up playing the entire game at center, the entire second preseason game at center. And he, again, definitely looked the part. So I would probably have Matt Lee right above Trey Hill as the backup center, and then maybe even Jackson Kirkland as the backup left tackle at this point, just because they've suffered injuries at tackle with Mims and Deontay Smith. And I think they've just really relied on Kirkland to kind of take on a role. They didn't have a ton of experience at the NFL level, and unfortunately for Jackson Carman, it's not looking good for him to make the team.
Yeah, and these are not really big surprises because of the conversation we had last time out, talking about Carman and expecting Lee. You liked what you saw and heard of right after we talked from the draft. So, yeah, the fact that it looks like he's one step closer. But Karras, you think Karras will end up being around at least another year after this?
So he got extended in June for just 1 year. And yeah, unless he just completely falls off a cliff this year, I would expect him to be back next year for sure.
Okay. All right. Let's now talk about Ja'Marr Chase and T. Higgins. So just when it looked like it was all about T. Higgins, Ja'Marr Chase decided to get involved. Maybe this is his way of helping his buddy out with the PR. I don't know. But so, yeah, I mean, it just completely caught everybody off guard.
I guess. I think the general vibe and consensus was he's entering his 4th year. Typically, players in that position, they have to play 4 years until they get that extension with the 5th-year option. But this year became different when you had guys like Penei Sewell, Christian Darrisaw, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle, all guys who were drafted in that first round. Ja'Marr Chase, they've already signed extensions. So they became these exceptions to what used to be the rule. Or like Justin Jefferson, Nick Bosa, just off the top of my head, they had to play 4 years until they signed like market resetting deals. So that was the assumption entering training camp. But I think Chase kind of saw his peers get paid these huge contracts. And obviously everyone knows that he deserves it and he will get that contract eventually. But I think it all progressed faster than the Bengals expected and maybe Bengals fans expected as well. And that's why he is preserving himself. He's just not practicing. He's still with the team. He's still attending practices and he still doesn't want to be that big of a distraction. But I can understand from his perspective, not wanting to put your body on the line before you're about to get paid this. And this is a way to speed up the process from the Bengals perspective. They talked right before training camp about, yeah, of course, we're going to bend over backwards, which was the exact words that President Mike Brown said. But again, I don't think that they expected to have to go through this right now. I think they expected this to happen next year when they still have Ja'Marr Chase under contract for another year in 2025. So I think this was a way for him to speed up that process. But of course, this is the Bengals and these things take time for them and they're pretty archaic ways. So typically late August, early September is when the biggest extensions in Bengals history have happened. And we're definitely approaching that time right now.
So odds, percentages, do you think the deal will get done?
I put out a toss up, to be honest with you. I still think the Bengals feel like they have leverage in just him being under contract for 2 years, but it's still a bluff that I think Jamar Chase wants to portray as like I might not play in the regular season until I get a deal, and he's definitely the second most important player on the team. So I think it would definitely be good for everyone to just get a deal done now.
Yeah.
But like this is going to be something that I think definitely does run up into the deadline, and I can't say for certain which way it's going to go.
Yeah, when players threaten to sit out the season, I mean, come on. I mean, nobody sits out the season.
No,
So
of course not.
it's ridiculous. But you know, we get it. Okay. So what's the latest on Higgins?
He looks the best he's ever looked. I think him showing up for training camp after signing the franchise tag, he didn't do what Jesse Bates did, which was hold out and just, not practice and be away from the team until right before the 2022 season when he signed the tag. I think he wanted to take the opposite approach and just solely focus on having the best possible season that he can. And that is why like he's out there in training camp, and I think he's playing a lot free and loose, and he looks like a dominant receiver. Now, of course, he's getting like all the number one looks, and I think he's better. He's a better receiver than the Bengals have at cornerback. Like this, so I think it's a mismatch every time that he goes out on the practice field, and obviously it helps when Joe Burrow is throwing him the ball. So he looks great. I think he looks poised to maximize his second contract year in a row, and hopefully that leads him to getting the deal that he deserves.
And again, the whole deal is speaking of deals, is he's going to play one more year, and then he will be somewhere else in 2025.
Pretty much, yeah. Like a second tag is possible, but that's still going to be a lot of money to spend on the second receiver. So
okay, all right, and then we've got the battle for that slot job. Who is in the lead?
I think this has a correct. I think Andre Yoshivas is probably in the lead. If you want to look at it from just a straight one-to-one replacement for Tyler Boyd, he's probably the best bet for that. But we've heard from Zach Taylor, we've heard from even Joe Burrow about how that role is going to be kind of delegated to multiple different guys and who are going to play multiple different roles coming out of the slot. So if it's just a receiver in those three wide receiver sets, I would say Yoshi is probably the favorite to do that. But you're going to have Mike Gesicki play on the slot for the most part, even though he's listed as a tight end. You're still going to have Charlie Jones once he comes back. He suffered a knee contusion about a week ago, so he's getting back in the practice, but he's going to get some reps there. Trenton Irwin is still relied on, and that's where he kind of has his best moments coming out of the slot. So it's going to be a lot of different names and numbers to come out of that position. But if there's one guy who's separating from the rest of the pack, it's probably Yoshi.
Okay. And do you think because they've got some pretty good players there already that were around last year, that Burton, no matter how well he might look or not in the preseason, that they're going to take it slowly and then next year will kind of be the year?
I think they can afford to do that. He was looking really good in OTAs, and I don't think he's had a bad training camp per se. I think it's just been the growth of both Yoshi, Charlie Jones, and just the continued presence of Trenton Irwin that has given them the comfort to say, we can just have this guy as wide receiver 6. We can let him work on the outside where he did most of his work at Alabama. He can be an immediate backup there where he's comfortable at. And we'll just be fine with like the 6 receivers that we have. And if he has to play, snaps due to injury, then we'll cross that bridge when we get there. But he is not, he doesn't have to be relied on as much because of the growth of the other young receivers that they have. They've even had him, returning kickoffs and punts now in the last preseason game and in practice, just because they just want to get the ball in his hands. And if they can't find a spot for him on the field as a receiver with the other guys stepping up, then might as well just use his explosiveness on a play that actually matters now.
Yeah, he was one of my top 2 pickups in my dynasty draft, my rookie draft. So, but I know it's going to take time. So no illusions that he is going to be a high impact player this year. And I'm sure Bengal fans will be happy with that because that means everybody will be doing their job. And that's exactly what Cincinnati needs after last season. Okay, so you mentioned the tight end position, Gesicki at tight end, and then, of course, Sample, Hudson, who had a career year, and the 2 rookies. So that's a pretty deep unit. And how's it going?
It's going well. Like Eric All returned quicker than I think people expected. He suffered a torn ACL last October at Iowa, and he was placed on the NFI list at the start of camp. And then he came off it like a couple days later, and he practiced immediately. And he was in 11 on 11s, and he was taking on contact, so he was ready to go from as soon as he got activated. and they haven't given him a ton of looks in the preseason, but he's looked well as a blocker, which is definitely going to help his case and just being active. So I would say Gesicki and Sample are the only Gesicki, Sample, and all are the only locks here. I think it might come down to Tanner versus Tanner if they want to just keep 4 tight ends. Like you said, Hudson had a great year last year. He's established trust with both the quarterback and the coaching staff, but McLaughlin has looked good in the preseason, and I don't think they want to put a 6th-round pick up for waivers. So maybe they have to do some gymnastics and keeping 5 tight ends initially on the team and having to make a decision after that. But I think if they do cut McLaughlin, he's probably going to be the best player that they do cut.
Yeah, and again, we talked about those 2 tight ends in our last discussion, and how all could very well have been a 2nd-round draft pick if he was healthy. And McLaughlin was really one of my favorite sleepers late in the draft. So it's good to see that he's carrying on well. All right, and then at running back, looks like everything is just the same since we spoke. What about Elijah Collins? Has he or Noah Kane? Has anybody done anything in the back end of that unit? Or is it, hey, it is the way it is. It's going to be Moss and Brown, 50-50 pretty much, and Travion Williams, number 3.
I think that's how it probably should go. The Evans injury opens up the possibility of a potential return with like maybe Samaje Perine coming back if he gets cut by the Denver Broncos. Obviously, Perine played a couple years with the Bengals, and he was a beloved player in the locker room and well trusted by the coaching staff. So just having a veteran who is familiar with the scheme, I think that might be enticing. But personally, I don't really see the need to go beyond Moss, Brown, and Williams. You're going to pass for his offense. And like you said, Brown and Moss are going to see plenty of time in each and every game. I think it could be a game-by-game basis about who gets more of the workload. There could be a scenario where Brown ends up having more touches and more snaps played than Zach Moss by the end of the year. But obviously Moss is the veteran. He was signed for a reason. As far as Collins and Kane goes, I think Collins is ahead of Kane on the depth chart, and he's quietly had a decent preseason, but probably not enough to force the Bengals' hand here and keep 4, including one of them. If they go 4, I think it'll be some type of a waiver wire pickup for sure.
All right, let's switch on over to the defensive side of the ball. And I know Adam Ramo's defense, the sacks, not very good overall until last year. They had a nice little pickup last year. And Trey Hendrickson, though, especially because the Bengals didn't have a great year last year, but I don't know. I wonder whether or not he is the most underrated player in the entire league.
It's a good argument for that. I mean, it's such a deep position group around the league, obviously, and particularly in the AFC North, where you have 2 of the best in TJ Watt and Myles Garrett. So he gets, overshadowed in his own backyard, which is not ideal. But I mean, he carries the Bengals pass rush, and it's not going to be as egregious as it has been in recent years, because I think Sheldon Rankins is going to provide a lot as an interior guy and someone who can clean up a lot of the pressures that Hendrickson forced. But obviously, when you have that penetrating 3 technique coming up the middle, it's much harder for quarterbacks to get out of the pocket there. So Rankins could be set up for a nice year just with being on the same team as Hendrickson, who they were teammates back in New Orleans. So that's a nice little reunion there. And outside of that, I really think Myles Murphy is primed for several hundreds of snaps. I think they don't want to overplay Hendrickson and Hubbard as much as they've done in years past. They want to keep those guys fresh in case a playoff run comes up, and they want those guys to be fully ready for that. And Myles Murphy got more of a workload towards the end of last season when they had injuries at the position. They have injuries at the position now because Cam Sample is out for the year, and Jeff Gunter ended up surprisingly retire. So that puts Murphy, he's locked in at edge 3. Joseph Asai's had a good camp as edge 4. And edge 5 is probably looking like Cedric Johnson's job to lose. He's had a good preseason. He's a 6th-round pick. I think he is the youngest guy on the team. He's got, 4 years on his contract. So that seems to be the 5. And outside of minor injuries to Hendrickson and Hubbard suffered early in camp, it looks like a decent group as far as the group that's going to be in the regular season.
Yeah, I mean, talk about those 3 rookies up front. You mentioned McKinley, Jackson, and then you've got Chris Jenkins. You also have, Jackson and Johnson. So talk about those 3 rookies up front.
So McKinley Jackson suffered, like I said, he suffered an knee injury of like the 2nd week, maybe the 1st week of camp, and he's been out ever since. And I think that has kind of cascaded into a lot of depth issues at particularly nose tackle. They've had Chris Jenkins take some snaps there, like just the straight up nose, the zero technique, and it may not be where his natural position is, but they're just really short on bodies there at the moment. Like J2 Fele was also dealing with injury. Dominique Davis was dealing with injury. So it was a lot of Zach Carter and Chris Jenkins for the first couple weeks of camp in the preseason. And Jackson is not back yet. Travis Bell's been playing a decent amount, and they signed like Carlos Davis and Andre Carter, I believe, as well. So they've gone through a lot of guys there. It's definitely still a weak point until it isn't. I think they're relying on Jackson to just be an immediate contributor, and his being injured right now is not going to help that. So it's going to be obviously Rankins and Hill starting with Jenkins being that third guy in the rotation. But Zach Carter, unfortunately, if he's going to make the team, he's probably going to be inactive at this point. I just don't think they can rely on any snaps from him against starting offensive lines. But like they might just need him just because they don't have anyone else healthy right now.
And Jenkins, we know how important this draft pick is going to be for the future of that position. So, I mean, overall, how do you think he's done?
He's done fine. I think he had a couple moments in the preseason opener where he looked a little bit overmatched against double teams, but he played really well against the Bears, and those are the Bears starting offensive line. So both him and Carter, played pretty well considering the competition. It's still a guy that I would say it's going to have several hundred snaps. You're talking like 300, 400, just because like that's what the third defensive end or third defensive tackle in the Bengals rotation, that's kind of his role. It's what BJ Hill was when he first came here in 2021 as like a third, fourth year player. So he's going to be relied on a lot as a rookie. Still a better run defender than pass rusher at this point. So they still need to find some type of alternative boost there behind Rankins, but a solid depth player for sure right now.
And you mentioned Osai seems to be looking good and being healthy. That's first things first with him. He needs, this is it, right? He needs to have a breakout of some capacity. Otherwise, he's not going to be here next year.
I would say so. And I think his agent being the same agent as T. Higgins is David Mulugeta doesn't help his case necessarily in getting a deal done. But like you said, he's had one good season in 2022, and it was a decent season for a rotational guy, but he started last year kind of injured, and he was slowly brought on. He just never really got off the ground. And what was it, a pretty pivotal third year. So this is the contract year of all contract years for him. He's not going to get a chance to get like 10 plus sacks or anything just because of the guys who are ahead of him, but he'll still be, relied on as a rotational guy and a guy that they want to play more because, again, they don't want to overwork their starters.
Very talented kid, loved him out of Texas, and it's a shame that he's been dealing with these injuries, but he's got a shot. It's still early in his career, so maybe he'll prove his worth, and I'm sure the Bengals could definitely use it because they're going to need some more depth there at edge rush. Okay, so let's talk about, Bengals are set at linebacker. They have been for the last couple of years. No changes there.
No, I think the one development could be Muma Jongmeta, the undrafted guy out of Wisconsin. He's had a phenomenal preseason. If there is room for 5 linebackers, I would say he's going to be the 5th there, but not ahead of Davis Gaither or Joe Bacci.
Okay, we're going to zero back in on Nam Jetta because I got another question regarding the free agents that didn't get drafted. All right, let's go to the secondary. And so your story that came out A to Z Sports regarding the camp battles. We already talked about the center position, the number 2 center position, and this is even more important. And that is Dax Hill, who did play slot at one of my football teams, Michigan, and he just hasn't been able to find a position so far in the pros, whether it's slot or safety. But now he's on the outside, and he's going up against another Michigan ander at corner, DJ Turner. Struggled a little bit last year. How is it going? It looks like it sounds like it's 50-50.
I want to take you through the timeline here, Greg. In March, they signed Geno Stone and Von Bell at safety, which basically ended Dax Hill's run at safety for the Bengals. So then the belief was, okay, he's going to be this hybrid slot defender who can come on the field in sub packages. Then they didn't draft a cornerback until like the 5th round in Josh Newton. They didn't sign a quarterback in free agency, so they had major depth issues there. And it was revealed that the plan was to just move Dax Hill to boundary cornerback, which, like you said, he's never played before. He was a safety coming out of high school. He was a slot defender at Michigan. He was a safety in the NFL. Now he's going to play in a completely new position. And I think a lot of people didn't have high expectations on that happening. And he's definitely looked the part. He's one of their best, most natural athletes in space. That's why he excelled in that man coverage role at Michigan in the slot. and it's just translated really well towards the boundary. His moving ability, his mirroring ability. He's gotten 3 pass deflections on just 4 targets in the preseason. He just looks more natural in man coverage compared to a guy like DJ Turner, who, like you said, had an up and down rookie season. Turner has his own skill set, and I think he still has value as like a first cornerback off the bench. But if that is still a battle for the opposite starting cornerback out of Cam Taylor-Britt, it's probably already over, and it's in Dax Hill's favor.
All right, very nice. Yeah, he's just way too talented to be
For sure.
to have been in this position, but you never know. It's again, it's position changing. We see it all the time. New coaching staff comes in, all of a sudden, the player is living up to what the team expected when they drafted him, or you got to leave, find a new home. He finds a new scheme, works for him. Happens all the time. So good for Dax Hill. Okay, so how's the rest of the secondary coming out? Because this was, of course, a big reason why there was not the success the Bengals were hoping for, even on, of course, defense, most of all. They just had, and I know you mentioned Stone's back, and I mean, Bell's back, and they got Stone in, so hopefully those communication issues are going to be a thing of the past. But overall, it sounds to me like the secondary is I mean, it sounds like a 180 compared to how the way, let's just put it this way, the way they ended the season and the way it looks now on paper, just completely different.
Oh, it is. And they sacrificed athleticism by removing Dax Hill and Nick Scott, who was the starter last year, for guys who aren't that athletic, and Geno Stone and Von Bell, but the communication and the cohesion with everything, and just people being in the right spots, in the right zones, and having the right assignments. That's where the 180 has come into play. Von Bell is brought in just off veteran minimum, just because he's getting paid by Carolina to not play for them this year, and it wasn't known at the beginning maybe that he was going to be the starter, but I think as soon as he came back into the building, there was a familiarity and a comfort with him, like just getting everyone lined up and just being that vocal leader in the secondary. And that's why he's going to see the field. He's starting. He's been the starter since OTAs, compared to Jordan Battle, who was a really promising rookie last year, but there's just not enough room on the field for him when they signed Geno Stone to a nice contract in free agency. So yes, Bell and Stone have brought that veteran just presence and just stability there to okay, we're going to be in the right spots. We're not going to give up explosive plays. Again, not the most athletic group of safeties in the NFL, and that might run into some issues with them, but compared to last year where just everything was just chaotic and they were giving up big plays, that should be a big difference this year for sure.
One of the things I noticed also over the last several years, I'm not so sure about last year, but even before that, was that they just, under this defense, they didn't use a whole lot of depth in the secondary. Hey, these are the 5 guys, and we're gonna play those guys, and if they're not injured, you're gonna look at the end of the season, and they're all gonna have 90% snaps. Was that talent, depth, reasoning, or is that just the way the scheme is, whatever the reason? Because it looks talent-wise, let's say Turner is on the bench. Let's say Battle is on the bench. You drafted Newton in the 5th round. I do see more talent overall, depth-wise.
I think that's more a Lou Anarumo thing. This goes back to 2022 when Dax Hill was first drafted, and he was being developed at safety. And he was a first-round pick who was just being on the bench, and he was asked about rotating Dax Hill, and he was very animated about, listen, man, I don't really like rotating guys in and out. These are my starters. I have trust in them. This, we're not going to adjust the whole process just to appease a first-round pick and whatnot. And I think that's more or less been the same thing. A guy like Dijon Anthony, for example, he's listed as a safety. He's going to play mostly in the slot on third downs. That's going to be a guy that gets rotated in certain sub packages. A couple years ago, they had a guy in Trey Flowers who played a similar role. Outside of that, though, I wouldn't bank on Hill and Turner rotating in and out unless it comes to a point where they need to see mid-season if there's a better option at that point. Jordan Battle, again, he's in that third safety role, and I think he still has value, but he may not see the field as much as his talent level would indicate. So I think they're at a point now, assuming that Dax Hill does enter the season as the comfortable starter, where they feel good and not having to look at alternative options in the middle season, because that's just not what Anarumo wants to do.
Okay, and speaking of Newton, just brought up his name just quickly, and as deep as the secondary does look at this moment, you would think that he's not going to see a lot of playing time. Just give him some time to develop as a young kid. I mean, have you noticed anything? Do you think this is a kid that could end up being around here for a while? Has he looked like it's too big for him? What's the early verdict so far?
The coaches adore Josh Newton. I think he's a phenomenal practice player. He comes in with the right attitude and he makes plays. Like he's made plays in both preseason games. He was more up and down against the Bears because he's not the best athlete. And I don't really know if on the boundaries where he's going to have the most success in his career. But being in the slot, taking over like that Mike Hilton role in a year, I could definitely see that. Like I think they want him. They would be fine if he saw the field. They're not going to rush him out there necessarily, but I think they are at a level where if he does have to play some snaps, they would be comfortable with putting him as a 5th-round rookie out there. He's had a really impressive training camp in preseason and a really good, I would say probably 5th or 4th cornerback to just round out that group.
Okay, so you mentioned John Meta, and
Yes.
we just talked about Newton. So those are a couple of rookies that have looked good so far in camp. Who else, as far as let's stick with the college free agents, the kids that were not drafted or kids that might have been on the depth chart last year and are trying to take that next step. Name a few guys that may have a little bit of a shot to either make the team or advance in year 2.
I mean, definitely John Meta is the guy that stands out the most. I was expecting more from Aaron Casey. I thought he may have been the better player out of college at linebacker, but John Meta is clearly ahead of him, and he's just made more plays than practically anyone on the Bengals defense this preseason. PJ Jules, I believe he's been both in the nickel and at safety. Like he's been pretty well in his very limited snaps. Lance Robinson unfortunately got burned for a touchdown last game, so he may be fighting for a practice squad spot at this point. Justin Blazek has gotten more reps just because they've had a lot of injuries at edge, but he hasn't really shown up. Andre Carter has been okay, but he was like at late training camp signing anyways. And again, like I said, Elijah Collins has been okay in preseason. He's got more looks than like a Noah Kane and whatnot. So yeah, it's been a relatively quiet year for like the undrafted rookies, but definitely John Meta stands out more than any of them.
And then take a look at that special teams unit. So we know McPherson. Don't have to worry too much about him at this point. The playoffs, that's what really matters, and he has not disappointed. Brad Robbins. So you talked about it already a little bit. What's your guess on whether or not he's going to end up starting on opening day?
So I think the injury definitely clouds this because a hip flexor can last like a week. It could last several weeks. He's only got 2 weeks until, the first week of practice of the season. And the good thing for him is that Ryan Rico has looked much better in practice, I would think, than the actual games. Like he was a bit up and down when he got all the reps against the Bears. So if I were to say right now, like just because he's healthy, I would say that Rico has the job. But because of the new IR rules, like they can place Robbins on IR to start the season, and then they can activate him 4 games afterwards. They can give Rico like a 4-game tryout to see if he can handle that role in the regular season. If he doesn't perform well, they can activate Robbins and make that a battle again. But I don't think if Robbins was healthy, I don't think this battle would be decided because Robbins wasn't looking terrible. Like he looks, marginally better than he did last year, which definitely makes this interesting. But just because Rico is healthy, I would just give the edge to him right now.
All right. It sounds like you're leaning towards that Robbins might start the year on IR and maybe Rico gets a 4-game tryout.
Yeah, that would be a good guess for me, just because I have no idea how long Robbins is going to be on. I don't really think they know for sure either.
Okay. And have you noticed anything yet in the preseason games regarding this new rule, the way the Bengals have handled it?
No, I think they've been okay in terms of returning. They've ran into a lot of penalties, I think, in coverage this previous week, which is something that needs to be ironed out. But Charlie Jones suffered like a knee injury right before the first preseason game, which is why they've had Jermaine Burton returning kicks along with Chris Evans. So Jones and Evans were both in the mix for kickoff returns. Trayvon Williams is still there who can handle that role, but I think they're experimenting with other returners, and just like every team, I think they're still getting used to just the flow of the play and making sure that there's no silly holding calls and anything like that. But nothing out of the ordinary, I would say, compared to other teams.
Yeah, I mean, just about everybody I've talked to, and for what I've seen myself, it just like nothing's happening so far, and you're just wondering whether or not. I mean, are they just holding? Are these coaches
Probably.
holding this back for the regular season? Yeah, because I don't know. I mean, you haven't noticed anything with the kickers, have you, regarding where they've kicked it? Are they kicking it in the end zone? We're getting a lot of that, kicking it in the end zone. Oh, I don't care. What, bring them out to 30.
McPherson has done a good job of putting it right up to the goal line. They haven't been asking to boom it, so I think they're just giving guys, reps on the coverage team to, make some plays.
All right, John. What do you got as far as you got that Orange and Black Bengals podcast on YouTube, right?
Yes, the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast is now under the Believe podcast network, and it's under the channel Believe in Cincy. So if anyone was subscribed to the old feed for Cincy Jungle, you got to resubscribe to Believe in Cincy wherever you get your podcasts.
Excellent, John. Let me see here. A couple of comments. Let's see. It just came. Actually, I should have been paying more attention. Let's see here. John, I was wondering if you can see the transactions that were made after every time the depth chart updates. What is this?
Is that a question for me?
I don't know. Maybe it was for me. So if you can see the transactions that were made. I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know what that means. What does that mean?
I think just like how, like the reasoning behind every depth chart change, like in terms of guys getting cut or put on IR or something like that.
So explanations. Well, what I do know is we're coming out with a new program. So it's interesting that we're getting this comment. I was just talking to John about this before the show. So we're going to have a really cool subscription package for, I think it's $20 a year. So when the transactions are updated at Ourlads, you can get them at real time. And then same guy, can you send me the Ourlads depth chart updates? Okay. I don't know. Who is the NFL roster guru? I don't know who you are.
But it doesn't sound like a guru to me if he wants all these updates.
I know, right? Sounds like this is an inside job. All right. Anyway, John, I appreciate your time, and I can't wait to talk to you during the season because look, I didn't even mention Joe Burrow.
Yeah,
and we're not gonna go into it. There's nothing to go over. Just about let's just all as a fan base, even outside Cincinnati, keep our fingers crossed because we need all the talented players in this league to stay healthy, and I certainly hope Burrow is one of them. So. I hope we could talk during the season because that means Burrow's healthy and the team is playing well.
Well, we need to mention Burrow for your SEO purposes. He is the star. He in the most recent practice, like he's been fine. Like he hasn't missed any practices, which is a little surprising to me. I would have thought he would have gotten a rest day here and there. The only update with him is that typically during the game, in some games when it's like windy or like this weird weather, he will wear a glove on the sideline between drives and just like to keep his hand warm. So he was experimenting with that in the latest practice. Like on the practice field between throws, people were speculating what that meant in terms of like, oh, is his wrist bothering him or whatever? But it's really just like him doing his regular routine, and people are just noticing it.
Is he going to play in the preseason?
He played in the first game in the first series. They scored a touchdown, and he was sad for the rest of the game. He didn't play in the second one. I highly doubt he's going to play in the third one.
Wow, what a surprise! They scored a touchdown on that drive. Well, anyway, sounds like if anybody is playing fantasy year to year, go after Joe Burrow. He's probably going to be one motivated man. And it looks like he's got two motivated wide receivers too. So
yeah,
should be a lot of fun. All right, John, appreciate it. We'll talk to you again, hopefully during the season.